Alright, welcome to the Explainer. Today we are digging deep into the real reason World War I began, and I can promise you it is not the story they taught you in history class. We're going to peel back the layers of the official narrative to uncover the massive, and I mean massive, economic forces that really set the world on fire, and it all revolved around one spectacular, world changing piece of infrastructure. So, we all know the story, right? The Great War kicks off because an archduke gets assassinated in Sarajevo. It's painted as this tragic accident, a domino effect of alliances that just spun wildly out of control. But you know what? That's the simplified version, the one written for the textbooks. The real story, the one that's driven by the cold, hard logic of imperial economics, isn't about two bullets. No, it's about a train. To really truly understand the origins of the First World War, and by extension, the modern Middle East as we know it today, we've got to look past the tragic assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We need to zoom out, way out, and look at a map of the world as it was back in 1900. Ike and their day, because the tensions, the real economic gunpowder, was already there, just waiting for a spark. Okay, try to picture this. It's the turn of the 20th century. The British Empire is the undisputed master of the globe. The sun literally never sets on it. It's a superpower in every sense of the word. But there was one thing, one specific development that its top strategic planners saw as a genuine existential threat. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't a new kind of battleship or a massive army. The answer was a train line. This single, unbelievably ambitious piece of engineering, the Berlin Baghdad Railway, had the potential to completely upend the entire global balance of power. It threatened to shatter Britain's chokehold on world trade. This, right here, is the story of that railway and how the effort to build it and the effort to destroy it changed everything. Alright, let's dive into this world of 1900. To really get a handle on why a simple railway was so important, we have to understand the key players on the world stage. Think of it as a high stakes game of chess. And these were the grandmasters. First up, you have the British Empire. Its global dominance rested on two unshakable pillars. The first was the Royal Navy. It was so powerful, it didn't just rule the waves, it owned them. Every major ocean shipping lane was under its thumb. The second pillar was the Suez Canal, the vital artery, the economic lifeline connecting Europe to India, which was the absolute crown jewel of the empire. So if you wanted to trade with the East, you had to go through Britain. Period. And now, across the channel, you have the German Empire. It was the new kid on the block, recently unified, and it was an absolute industrial titan. Its factories were actually outproducing Britain's. But Germany had a huge problem. It was a giant trapped in the heart of Europe. It didn't have a big overseas empire for raw materials, and more importantly, it was completely blocked from global markets by that all-powerful British fleet. It was like having the world's best sports car with no roads to drive it on. And then to the southeast, you have the Ottoman Empire. Once it was a fearsome superpower, but by 1900, it was famously known as the sick man of Europe, and its biggest sickness, debt. The empire was literally drowning in loans owed to British and French banks. It got so bad that a board of European bankers was put in charge of collecting Ottoman taxes just to pay back the creditors. The empire was being hollowed out, eaten alive from the inside by foreign finance. Okay, so this is the moment. This is where the interests of a trapped, ambitious Germany and a desperate, crumbling Ottoman Empire converge. And out of this desperation and ambition came a truly game-changing plan. The Ottoman Sultan, he needed a way to modernize, to connect and defend his vast lands without having to rely on the very same bankers who were bleeding him dry. He needed a railway, and the German Kaiser saw the opportunity of a lifetime. The gambit was simple, but absolutely revolutionary. Build a massive railway, an iron road connecting Berlin to Constantinople, and then push it all the way through Anatolia, across Mesopotamia, to Baghdad, and finally to the Persian Gulf. This would create a colossal overland trade route, a silk road of steel that the Royal Navy could not blockade, could not control, could not even touch. And this quote really just captures the whole situation perfectly. Let's break it down. For the Ottoman Sultan, this railway was a lifeline. It was a chance to centralize his empire, move troops, and maybe, just maybe, escape the clutches of his creditors. For Germany, it was a golden path to world power, a way to bypass the British fleet and directly access the markets and resources of the Middle East. And for Britain, it was an absolute, unmitigated nightmare. Now, as German engineers began blasting tunnels through the Taurus Mountains and laying track across the Syrian desert, their geologists started to realize something. the very land the railway was set to cross. This ancient territory of Mesopotamia, what we now call Iraq, was sitting on a secret. It was a resource that would come to define the entire next century of warfare, and that resource, of course, was oil. And here's the kicker. As part of the deal, the Germans had secured the mineral rights for 20 kilometers on either side of the railway track, a 40-kilometer wide corridor slicing through the heart of the Middle East. And the timing couldn't have been worse for Britain. The Royal Navy was in the middle of a massive conversion, switching its entire fleet from coal to oil, precisely to maintain its speed and dominance. If this train line was finished, Germany would literally control the tap that fueled the future of the British Empire's power. So back in London, the alarm bells weren't just ringing, they were screaming. The British establishment decided very simply and very coldly that this railway could not, under any circumstances, be allowed to reach the sea. And so they launched a multi-front covert war to kill the project before it could ever be completed. They used every weapon in their considerable arsenal. First, they turned to diplomacy. They leaned on the Sheikh of Kuwait, basically forcing him to sign a secret agreement that made Kuwait a British protectorate, effectively blocking the railway from getting a deep water port on the Persian Gulf. Next, propaganda. British newspapers went into overdrive, painting the project as a tool of German imperialism and Ottoman tyranny. And finally, finance. The City of London, the financial capital of the world, blacklisted the project, refusing to allow any British capital to be invested. But despite all of this, the Germans just kept building. By 1914, the railway was tantalizingly close to completion. The rails had crossed the mountains and reached deep into southern Turkey. The threat was no longer theoretical. It was becoming real mile by mile. The great powers were on a collision course. And it's in this context, the context of a nearly finished railway, that we have to view the outbreak of World War. The war was the final solution to the railway problem. Now think about this for a second. When the war begins, Britain's first major military move isn't towards Berlin. It's not a massive army sent to France. No, it was an expeditionary force sent to Basra in what is now southern Iraq. And what was their mission? To march north following the exact path of the unfinished railway and seize the oil fields of Mosul and Kirkuk before the Germans or the Ottomans could secure them. The war in the Middle East wasn't about defeating an army, it was a corporate raid. It was about securing an asset. And here's where it gets even more cynical. The war is still raging. Millions are dying in the trenches of Europe. But even before it was over, Britain and France were meeting in secret to decide how they would carve up the Ottoman lands. In 1916, two diplomats, a Brit named Mark Sykes and a Frenchman named François Picot, sat down with a map, a pencil, and a ruler, and they just drew lines across the Middle East. And the true goal becomes shockingly clear when you look closely at that map. The lines they drew, which completely ignored thousands of years of tribal, ethnic, and geographic realities, they corresponded almost perfectly to the proposed route of the Baghdad Railway and the known location of its oil deposits. This wasn't nation building. They were carving up an empire to seize control of that strategic corridor and its oil forever. So here is the most crucial point. This story didn't end in 1980. Yes, the British stopped the railway. They seized the oil. But the ghost of that project, the core geopolitical logic behind it, is still haunting us. It's playing out right now, a century later. Just look at how history echoes today. Back then, you had a rising industrial land power, Germany, challenging a dominant naval power, the British Empire. Fast forward to today. You have a rising industrial land power, China, challenging a dominant naval power, the United States. The players have changed, but their roles on the global stage are terrifyingly similar. And what, you might ask, is at the heart of this new great power competition? Just like a century ago, the central conflict revolves around a massive infrastructure project. Then it was the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, designed specifically to bypass British sea control. Now, it's China's Belt and Road Initiative, a sprawling network of ports, pipelines, and, yes, railways, all designed to connect the Eurasian continent and bypass American sea control. It's the same playbook, just on a much, much larger scale. So here's the final crucial takeaway. When we look at the wars in Iraq and Syria, the endless tensions with Iran, the persistent instability all across the region, it's not a coincidence that so many of these conflicts seem to explode along the exact same geopolitical fault lines where those rails were laid 100 years ago. That's about geography. It's about controlling that land bridge between Europe and Asia. The world we live in today, the conflicts we see on the nightly news, were all fundamentally shaped by this forgotten economic war. The chaos we see isn't just about ancient hatreds or religious divides. It is the direct, tangible legacy of a business deal that threatened an empire. The train that was supposed to bring prosperity and connection brought war and division instead. And in so many ways, that train that never arrived is still shaping our world.